Yo, what is up there, guys? It's Mothership checking in with a Group C recap from the GSL Round of 32 Code S. SK Telecom T1 Sue, StarTale Panic, I Am Rune, and Jin Air Greenwings SOS will all be fighting for their spot in the round of 16, so let's see how the games went. The first series of the night features the only Zerg in the group, Sue facing off at a ZVP against Panic, a Protoss from StarTale. Alright, so beginning on Habitation Station, we see Panic go for a double proxy gate. Luckily for Sue, the drone is able to scout the main and let him be aware of the cheese, and even gets a probe kill. The Zealots of Panic try to get some damage done, but having been aware, Sue gets his pull up early enough and defends easily. To follow up, Sue gets a Roach Warren, counters and swiftly takes game number 1, barging at Panic's ramp. Well, after a crushing game 1, we see things go a bit more normally. Sue gets his 3 hatches just so quickly and Panic going for a 1-gate expand into Phoenixes. Sue plays super greedy, even delaying gases, meaning he gets an insane economy really early on. Panic, however, kills a bunch of overlords and picks off drones at the Phoenixes while taking a 3rd base himself, looking a lot better than in the first game. Moving out with a big Sentry Stalker army, Panic is able to pick off the 4th base of Sue, even with a good number of swarm hosts on the narrow Yonsu. Without any splash damage though, Panic starts to bleed expensive units at his 3rd base after his aggression. With double Robot Colossus, Panic tries to move out, but Sue has been keeping up with his tech and has added in Broodlords, which, with the help of the Swarmhouse, pushes Panic back into a defensive position. While Panic's Warp Prism has been able to deal some decent damage, eventually the massive Zerg army camped outside of Panic's 3rd becomes too much, and Sue wins and moves on to the winner's match. Now for a PvP between Rune and SOS to see who will win and play Sue, and who will lose and drop down to play Panic. Like almost all PvPs, we don't see too much of a variance in their build orders, with both players getting their Gateway, Cybernetics Core, and Gases. Eventually, Rune makes a Twilight Council very quickly and gets Blink, while SOS gets a Robo. SOS does a bit of early aggression with his Mothership Core and first 3 Stalkers, and is actually able to kill a Stalker of Ruin, and forces out the Photon Overcharge and scouts the Blink build as well. In response, SOS also gets his own Blink and later expansion compared to Rune's. Neither player attempts to break the other's natural, and Rune takes the 3rd while SOS adds on a ton of gateways, looking like he wants to break SOS while he takes a slightly later expo. Once his upgrades finish, and with superior positioning between Rune's 3rd and natural, SOS careens through to a victory in game number 1. Now on to Frost. Skipping over the early game mirroring, we see SOS throw down a quick Twilight Council against the fast expand of Ruin, which he then follows up with the Robo. SOS, having scouted this, decides to proxy a Stargate, and while pressuring at the natural with the Stalkers, gets a ton of kills with the Oracle and expands as well. Then, having finished Blink, uses the Oracle to get Sight and blinks into the main and deals some more damage. Both players take their 3rds, and in a very similar game as to the first one, SOS with an extra attack upgrade just plows right through Ruin and into the winner's match. Now for the tongue-tying tribulations between Sue and SOS in the 3rd series of the night as EVP. On Yonsu, we see a Nexus first out of SOS and an attempted cannon rush on the quick 3rd hatch, but with the pulled drones out of Sue, he decides not to commit to it. SOS follows up with the Stargate and gets a few Void Rays, which manages to cancel the 4th base of Sue once SOS gets his 3rd secured in mining. The Void Rays are so sick that they even able to kill off the main base, and SOS starts to hit his stride, just outplaying Sue. Using a Warp Prism, he tries to get the main hatch a 2nd time using his Void Rays, but actually loses the Void Rays, but manages to get the main and the 3rd as well with the Zealot Warp in. As Tasteless put it during the cast, this game is pretty much Protoss porn, and one of the sickest things that SOS does is to recall probes from his 3rd to the walled off expansion in order to mine there. SOS tries to hold for as long as possible with Corruptor Swarmhouse, but the bases keep dying, and eventually SOS takes the win in the first game. Now for game 2 on Daedalus Point, will we have our first Zerg move on to the round of 16, or will SOS triumph and force Sue to try again against the winner of the loser's match? Although sometimes we see some crazy things in Daedalus, this game we do not, and both players get their respective third bases and play for the later stages of the game. With Hydras coming out of Sue, SOS tries to pressure the third of Sue with a mainly Stalker Sentry Force, but backs off without too much tech other than DTs coming out. Again, with a very similar composition, SOS seems like he really wants to make this Gateway army work. But now maxed out in Roach Hydra, SOS takes a crushing engagement against a retreated Protoss and takes a solid game 2, with there being no splash damage out of SOS. Alterzim is the map pick of SOS, as we are starting to see Protoss favor this map. This map is so large that greedy macro play is typical, and that is what we see out of SOS, but Sue opts to get his gas for speed in a pool after his natural, and then takes his third. Sue never seems able to capitalize on that initial early speed and gets Hydras out to tech up and take his fourth, while SOS techs up to the standard Void Ray Colossus. Making use of the large map, Sue begins building up a muted Corruptor force and both players keep expanding, neither being very aggressive other than a few pokes from Sue's air army. Sue though, trading a bit with his air army, is able to pick off the fourth of SOS by distracting him. Sue keeps pressuring and pulling SOS apart with his massive air army, and SOS decides he has had enough and goes for the base trade. SOS trading too many units with the defensive structures and splitting up his army actually gets his army crushed by defensive mutas, and Sue will be the first Zerg and first non-Protoss to advance on to the round of 16 of the GSL Code S. Now for a PvP between Panic and Ruin. Will we get to see a rematch between Panic and SOS? Well, let's find out. Neither player goes for anything too crazy to begin with, as has become the meta in PvP. Panic though does opt for some heavy 3-gate aggression that manages to begin by weakening a Stalker of Ruin, killing another, and forcing out a Photon Overcharge. Using his early advantage and with great micro against an unprepared Ruin, Panic takes a speedy game number 1. So, Polar Knight now potentially Ruin's last game in the GSL for this season. We don't see any sort of cheese from either player. We see Ruin go for a Twilight Council, then expand, and Panic places a proxy Stargate that gets a few kills. Without being able to get too much done though, he then backs off and places his own Nexus while getting Immortals out. Compared to the last game, this one is far more passive and Ruin takes a third base, to which Panic decides he would like to pressure with more Immortals and some Archons, having then taken a later third. He coincides this attack with a nice Warp Prism drop and Warpin in the main, then snipes the third and recalls out with his main army. The counter from Ruin though is massive, but still with the higher Immortal count, Panic takes the 2-0 and will go on to play a rematch against SOS. The final series of the group, a PvP versus Panic and SOS, begins on Frost, the second largest map in the map pool. The game begins as SOS gets a faster Twilight than Panic, SOS going DT, then Robo and Panic going straight for Blink. The early pylon of SOS gets taken out, but the DT barely gets warped in. Panic does force field it out long enough for the Ops to get out, but he messes up big time, letting 2 sentries die to the single DT, and SOS has taken a faster expansion and has the tech advantage. Although he doesn't go for the throat immediately, SOS is such a strong player that he never loses his advantage and eventually outplays Panic. Now, game 2 on Yonsu, we see both players doing their standard respective mirrored openers until both go for simultaneous Twilight Councils. SOS doing the same build as the last game and Panic getting Blink again, but this time goes up to 4 gates, meaning he will not have detection and dies immediately once the DTs enters his base, ensuring that SOS will move on to the round of 16. With the faster set of games in the group with so many one-sided PvPs, we saw Sue, the first non-Protoss player to advance, leaving the group 2-0, followed up by SOS, both of them beating out Ruin and Panic. By the way, thanks a ton for watching, and please help to spread these recaps with as many people as you can to help let people know about the GSL and so that I might get a chance to visit Korea and watch the GSL live. Again, SCMothership checking out. See ya.